Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Alien vs. Predator Galaxy podcast, the original Alien and Predator podcast. This is Aaron Percival, aka Corporal Hicks.
And this is AJ Bischoff, aka Voodoo Magic.
And welcome to 2021. This is episode 121, actually. That's a good number to start on. So that absolute shit stain of a year, 2020 is behind us, and
thank goodness.
We're going to try and start off 2021 pretty positive. I mean, we kind of did 2020 as well. That was our big 100, and we had a nice interview for that one. But we've also got a really good interview for this one. So if you listen to our Predator 2 anniversary podcast, you'll have heard that I tried so hard to get somebody from the film on the show to talk about it for the anniversary, to go alongside our own retrospective. And, I emailed Danny Glover's people. I emailed Stephen Hopkins' people. Maria Conchita Alonso.
Yes.
Yep. I tried to contact her. Ruben Blades, I tried to contact him. Even some of the stunt guys, and I got nowhere with it. But
Aaron was doing his due diligence, guys. He was trying his hardest to make an interview happen within his 30th anniversary.
And I was trying for months as well. This wasn't just me panicking in the last week. This was me really trying, and got nowhere. But then Scream Magazine came out with their interview with Stephen Hopkins, and I messaged him. I was like, how did you get in touch with him? And they tried the same person I did. They tried the same agent I did. So all I learned from that is keep bugging them, and eventually you'll get there. So, 4 or 5 emails later, who did we get on the show, AJ?
Stephen Hopkins. And I would like to think, in my mind, that it was our quite public and robust celebration of Predator 2 on avpgalaxy.net, on the socials, where the stars just aligned, and encourage Stephen Hopkins to be just gracious enough to sit down with us for an interview, And so, we relished at the chance, and I was so excited to talk to him, and so was Aaron. Both of us are just big fans of the film, and for me, it's the best film in the franchise and one of my favorite films of all time. So this was exciting to talk about Predator 2, what Thomas Brothers called the Bible, and it's truly the core of what most of the extended universe has expanded upon. So this was a quite, pinch me, am I dreaming moment, And
what a big one to go for your first interview on the show.
Yes. I mean, this was, if anyone was going to fanboy out, it was going to be me. And I was quite nervous, but I was excited too, because we definitely we posed some tasty questions in this interview, from Arnold Schwarzenegger's involvement to those legendary NC-17 cut rumors to the Predator dance number, on the Lost Predator ship, that video that broke out on YouTube for the longest time. So we have a lot of good questions lined up, and it was an exciting interview. And for those hardcore Alien fans out there, there's going to be some Alien discussion for you as well to chew on, including Hopkins and maybe his involvement with Alien 3, and of course that xenomorph skull in the Lost Predator ship trophy room. And we even discussed that certain slaughterhouse scene, that was eerily similar to a certain scene in James Cameron's Aliens. So is that a coincidence? We'll find out.
So if you haven't cottoned on, we've already recorded this interview. It's not about to happen from our perspectives as we're recording. This was recorded at the end of 2020, and it's all nicely done and ready. We're recording this after I've already edited it and everything, and that's that. So AJ,
what, ready?
Yeah, what do you say? Do we do a magic transition or a Predator sound effect swipe to lead us into the interview?
Shit happens.
I meant an actual sound effect. I've already got one ready. But yeah, that's staying in.
Okay, let's do it.
Anyway, enjoy the interview.
Okay, first things first, Stephen. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to come and talk to a big couple of Predator fans, Predator nerds on the internet. Now, but before we start to actually dig into Predator 2, though, I was hoping you could tell our listeners and our viewers a little about Stephen Hopkins outside of Predator 2. Can you tell us a little about your journey as a filmmaker?
Well, I started off as a comic book artist as a kid. You know, I was before I even went to art school, I was doing splash pages for Marvel UK and then various underground comics and album covers and punk bands and stuff like that. And then it was kind of a lonely job. You know, I mean, if I want to go way back, I was born in Jamaica and brought up in Jamaica and America, and then arrived in England in the 60s and discovered that England had lots of white people and no beaches. And then went to school there, and I'd sort of grown up. We traveled around the States for a long time in a car, so I'd grown up reading comic books. So I was a comic book freak, and I've got a gigantic collection now in boxes all over the place. So I was a big comic book fan, and that didn't really work out. I was too young. I wasn't really good enough, I don't think, or I wasn't applied enough, and it was a lonely job. So I just accidentally got a job doing storyboards for rock videos in the very early 80s. In I think Duran Duran was the first video I worked on, I think. And then I became a designer very quickly, very young, and worked with some of these great rock video directors like Russell Mulcahy specifically, and David Mallet and Brian Grant and Steve Barron sort of occasionally. And then I just started designing big videos and big commercials. And then in those days, people couldn't really tell what you had or hadn't done. So I just lied a lot and started directing lots of rock videos at the age of like 23, 24. Moved to New York, started doing stuff there. And then I was supposed to go to Australia to do an Elton John video or a few Elton John videos. And I got there just doing the sets for them, like sad songs and all these big, videos. And he decided to get married to a woman, which surprised all of us. And so I got stuck there. And while I got stuck there waiting for the videos to happen, I started directing a lot of rock videos there. And when I was there, I did lots of rock videos and commercials. I did big theater, musical theater, a thing called Rasputin, which was enormous. And then my friend Russell Mulcahy invited me to come and do the second unit. Actually, he wanted me, first of all, to design the Highlander. And I thought, I'm too young. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to be a disaster. So I turned it down. And then he asked me to do second unit, which was very exciting. So I went to England from when I was living in Australia. I stayed in Australia, went back to England and went to Scotland and New York and London and shot. And that was my first film experience, which was just a fantastic experience. I ended up having Sean Connery for a bunch of days, and he publicly humiliated me on set every day because I was so stupid. But I shot loads of great stuff, and I knew Russell's style very well, so I was copying what he was doing. And then because of that, actually, then I just happened to, I directed lots of big music concerts for Mick Jagger and different people around the world, and then directed a tiny film in Australia called Dangerous Game, which was seen in Cannes by a bunch of Hollywood people. I got invited to Hollywood, and I was going to do Pet Sematary 2, I think, originally. That didn't, or Pet Sematary, but it didn't happen. And I ended up doing Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, which was and it was during a writer's strike. So we sort of had to make it up as we went. And I got that job on Valentine's Day, and it had to be out in August. And so I was actually shooting a few days before it was in the cinema. And during that, Joel Silver at the time was just picking off Nightmare on Elm Street directors, I think, and grabbing him for stuff. And Dangerous Game was quite a big sort of stylish action film on a small budget. So he just came to me with this, and I thought, this is incredibly exciting. So I started working on Predator 2 before I finished Nightmare 5, and we kind of overlapped. So that's the very short version of all of that.
Did Joel see Dangerous Game?
I think he or one of his people had seen it. I think he had seen it. Yeah, Joel's like a computer. He was in those days, he was such a ferocious filmmaker, and he could remember everything that everyone had ever done. He had this, computer mind for stuff, and obviously, style was something that he enjoyed sometimes more than substance, I think. And Larry Gordon and Joel both produced Predator 2, and it was for Fox, and it was Rupert Murdoch's first film at Fox when they took over. So we're in the middle of a transition, and I think he just liked the way my stuff looked. He thought it was, and that was enough, I think, and I was cheap. And so actually, thanks to him, less cheap after that. And then, and then we didn't have a huge budget for Predator 2, but what a great opportunity. And I was allowed to get Larry Paul on and my mate Peter Levy from Australia. And so it was a riot. Yeah.
Well, still ended up being more expensive than the first film.
I don't know. I don't know how much the first film cost, actually. I think our film cost 30 million, which is a lot of money, I think, but not a massive amount of money for, a huge science fiction action film. And the film we made was, all before the digital time. So everything was a film optical. It was quite an unwieldy thing to make. It wasn't like you could go, we'll just put that creature in later. That didn't happen in those days.
We'll do it in post.
Yeah. Everything had to be done, really properly, because you couldn't, you couldn't, it was all film opticals. We shot a chunk of it on 70mm, actually, because so as the opticals were, constantly changed, it didn't degrade too much. And those cameras were that big.
Well, speaking of the first film, one of our traditions on the show that we love to ask our guests, especially the ones such as yourself who have shaped the franchise in such significant ways, is about the first time they actually encountered the Predator. So do you remember the first time you actually saw the original 1987 film, and what was your thoughts about it?
I'm going to be a terrible person and say I saw it when I got the job, because I hadn't caught up to it at the time. I'd been living in Australia and I'd been working flat out, and I had never seen it, but I saw it. And then I met John McTiernan, who was at Fox working. Cause I obviously did Die Hard after that, right? And I had a long chat with him about it, and he was really helpful. And, he's a very serious guy, John. So he didn't, Predator to him was not like a camp sort of horror experience. It was a very thematic, he's a great director. And if you watch his work from a director's point of view, anyway, you can see that he has so much skill. There's a lot of stuff happens in one shot, or it's very carefully thought out. But it was obvious that the first Predator film was really, so well cast. The idea was so terrific, and you never saw the Predator until the end, So, and one of the reasons Joel explained that the Predator wasn't really, they didn't really know what it was until late into filming. At one point it was Jean-Claude Van Damme on stilts, and then that was redesigned by Stan into all these different, amalgamations of things into Kevin, in an amazing suit. But the suit in the first film, you hardly ever saw it, as it's really well lit. And in the second film, obviously, we had to see a lot of this creature, and you'd already seen it, so it was no huge surprise. So Stan had really upgraded the Predator when I came along, and then we continued to upgrade it even more, knowing that we were going to have close-ups all over the place. He was going to be a main character in it,
Really. So kind of going into, the development of Predator 2 then. So, you start the film, you haven't seen the first one necessarily.
Well, I saw it as soon as I offered it. All my friends knew about it. I went and got a great screening in a fantastic cinema.
It was already in like your public consciousness.
Yeah.
Okay. But for nerds like us though, there's so much outside of the movies. There's what they call the expanded universe, or the comics and stuff like that. Now, when you were working on Predator 2, the franchise didn't have that, the sprawling expanded universe that it does now. All those books on that shelf behind me, a load of those are Predator books.
Right.
You didn't have that. You had a single comic, the very first comic from Dark Horse and Mark Verheiden. Now, we've had the pleasure of speaking to Mark in the past. and he told us that he'd at least met with the Thomas brothers to discuss his series and where he was going with it. And the brothers seem to have taken some inspiration from that first issue. So I was curious as to if you personally, because you were so involved in the scripting process as well, were you aware of the comic, and did that directly inspire any of the things that you brought to Predator 2?
I thought the comic didn't come out. I thought it came out concurrently when we were working on the film, I think.
Your first issue was the one that...
Is this the one drawn by Ross Andrew? Did he draw it? Oh, no,
it was Chris Warner.
All right.
So I think AJ might know better than me.
I wrote with Mark on other things, actually, since then. So...
apparently the story goes, as Mark presents it, is that Joel reached out to him. It was a 4-issue series, and the first issue was out, and Joel Silver reached out to him, or one of his representatives, and says, hey, we really like your story. We want to see where it's going in the rest of the issues, and can we meet with you? So apparently Joel Silver sent some representatives and the Thomas brothers to talk to Mark. And that first issue is very similar to the Backbone or Predator 2 in regards to...
It was a Predator in LA, was it?
I think
it's New York.
In New York. Oh, yeah, I do remember that now. Now I remember it. Yes, thank you. In New York, that's what it was.
Yeah, but it did have the competing gangs.
Yeah.
So
I have to apologize. It was 30 years ago, so some of this stuff is a little jumbled, and it was kind of a rush thing anyway. But now I remember that. I remember seeing the drawings of that, and I'm a big fan of Mark's. And we worked together since on Tales from the Crypt and all sorts of stuff. And I remember that now. And I couldn't remember if that was some storyboards from somebody else, but it was the actual comic book. And then I remember being slightly involved in the Dark Horse version with Ross Andrew drawing a version, like a comic book based on the movie, right?
Yeah, they did. They did a. They did a.
It's quite difficult to draw the Predator too. I think the Predator always. Yeah, I mean, unless you've got that kind of, it's hard to draw him in the old comic book style because unless he feels larger than life and beautifully lit, he can look a bit goofy, I think.
Yeah, well, it's very dependent on the artist skill there, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, was that any particular inspiration? Do you remember? Was there anything in there that you saw that was pulled with you to Predator 2, or was it just?
I do remember seeing the drawings now, but I think because we were doing in LA, we were much more focused on what LA was going to be like in the crazy future than it was, and we thought it was going to be a very hot, dusty, anarchic world, which is certainly true about Los Angeles right now. And we, looking for style, we sort of went into a sort of Latino Cuban retro style of the future where the police station was guarded and there were riots and gangs. So I think the gangs thing was a basis from the comic book idea, I think. And then, that the Predator comes up. But being in LA, it didn't have that sort of New York feel. But I think I did some drawings actually, and I think in the film too, when I put the Predator on the top of the Eastern Building in LA, there was a sort of New York homage there because I always saw him hovering above, like in all good superhero things, right, looking down
on the Empire State on some sort of gargoyle or something like that. Yeah.
But in 1989, you couldn't really leap from building to building in LA because there weren't any.
That's fair. So you mentioned Joel earlier. And how he'd liked your style in particular. So when he reached out to you, do you remember any more about those sort of like early conversations? How did he pitch this project to you, and what was your immediate reactions to what you could bring to this?
Well, Joel is just a very direct person, and he just said we wanted something mind blowing and huge and stylish, and and took bits from my first film and said, I love that bit. And it really didn't take very long. It was in those days, it was interesting when you'd start a film, you'd often have a conversation with the head of a studio or a producer as big as Joel. And you'd go, okay, and you'd shake hands and off you go. And there was no real, the script was not completely finished. So I was sent like a 60-page, mostly finished draft. And we just come out of a writer's strike. and then we were about to go into a new writer's strike, so we had to do a lot of and the Thomas brothers obviously knew this stuff really well and worked with Joel a lot and knew this character better than anyone else. And of course, originally it was, Arnold's character with Lieutenant Harrigan. In the original version, it started off on a golf course with this guy with white hair playing golf, and a helicopter lands, and these guys come out, and the guy with the white hair turns around, it's Arnold with a scar across his face, and they say he's back, and off you go. And it was Arnold and Danny, together going through this at the time. But then that didn't work out, I think, mainly because Jim Cameron, who I knew pretty well then, just didn't want Arnold to do Predator 2 and then Terminator 2. And it was really, he sort of gave him a choice, and I've, how can you argue with that choice? Terminator 2 is one of the greatest, science fiction films I've ever made. So I think Arnold really knew that he couldn't do all both at the same time because it didn't feel right, and so he didn't, and I think it was a problem at the box office, probably, but.
Well, there was a rumor circulating for years afterwards that the Gary Busey role, the character Peter Keyes, was always intended for Arnold to play. So as you mentioned, you had planned for Danny Glover and Arnold Schwarzenegger together to star in Predator 2 at one point. Can you recall if that governmental Keyes role was somewhat...
Arnold was going to play the same character as he did from the first film. He was going to play the guy who'd been through that madness, had left, like the gunslinger, and I think Keyes pulled it back in, but the Keyes wasn't such a big character in the original script. Because Arnold didn't do it, he became a much bigger character, a government character,
So would he have been there sort of like tracking the Predator to kill it down kind of thing, or?
He would have been the guy who wouldn't have been telling the cops what was going on, but trying to use the police force to get him into a position to deal with the creature, so, and the government would have wanted him to be on their side, but I think he was going to be fighting for his own agenda. He wanted revenge, and he wanted to know what was going on, as opposed to, and he was going to use the government and eventually ally himself with Harrigan and go head to head with the creature.
So kind of like a three-way kind of situation, the cops are dealing with it, Dutch is there with his own agenda trying to deal with it, and the government's doing what they would do in the finished film of picking, it up for the technology. Yeah, that's interesting. So that was like a 60-page thing?
Yeah, Joel and Larry obviously had both done independently 48 Hours and Lethal Weapons, so it was very much in that, in that wheelhouse. Where there was two cops who didn't really know each other and had to do it, go head to head, had to fight together against something.
Well, so once Arnold was out, you had to cast, or you came up with a great casting choice of Danny Glover. And Danny Glover reported to say that one of the many reasons he jumped at the chance to play Mike Harrigan in Predator 2 was the opportunity to break through racial boundaries. And as Danny Glover put it, when's the last time you saw a black man fighting a supernatural being?
Right.
So was it difficult in 1989, 1990 for you to get the studio to agree on casting Danny Glover and such a hugely diverse supporting cast?
I think they were, concerned on the international markets, that they were worried about stuff like that. Obviously, hopefully it doesn't matter anymore. Mind you, I think it does in certain markets, there's still a racism involved, but luckily Danny had done the Lethal Weapon films, which were huge. And I think that helped us break a mold, and because we set it into this Latino future, we were allowed to have Maria Cachita Alonso and Ruben Blades and, and really diversify like that. And it wasn't a conscious anti-racism choice because I'm blind to that kind of thing. I hope I am as much as possible. And so I just wanted the best people for the part. And Joel really fought it, and Fox weren't sure. And they kept on trying to figure out whether but Danny also wasn't. It wasn't just a racial thing. I think it was also he hadn't stood out. I hadn't been the lead in one of these films before, you know. And later in my career, I've done movies like Blown Away and Judge and things like that, and where I cast actors who weren't really action stars a lot of the time, because I always liked to blend that kind of intelligent actor with action, you know, because I was brought up with the great 60s and 70s thrillers and action movies like Gene Hackman. You know, these are not sort of, you know, studly go to the gym kind of guys. They're just really tough, rough guys. And I always liked that in my thrillers. And I kind of saw this, you know, more of a thriller in a way, I think, than a horror film, you know, or a soup. And it was more like that. It was more probably like French Connection than it was like you know, a normal horror movie, I think.
That's one of the interesting things about Predator as a concept, though. I think it's really flexible in what you do with it, so you can take it and put it in different genres and sort of see what the result is. And you know, and you've got that with Predator 2 being so different from the way the first one's handled, and then the third one, and then the batshit crazy fourth one, kind of thing. So yeah,
what's the batshit crazy fourth one? Which one's that?
Shane Black's.
Oh right. And I was so surprised that film didn't do better, because Shane is a master of this genre. I mean,
you mentioned Lethal Weapon already. You know, that film's fucking brilliant.
Yeah, and I think his film was really mucked about in post. I think I sent it to pieces. It doesn't fit right. It doesn't feel like because he's such a smart guy. You know,
it was very much a. He had his own vision that was still crazy anyway. We've seen the first script, but then you had the studio interference that just ripped it to pieces in the edit. So yeah, right. But anyway, we're not here to talk about Shane Black. Thing. Just to go back a little in the timeline, because I think we missed one here, and that's in terms of, you know, your early collaboration with the Thomas brothers. The great thing about those guys is they were there for 1 and 2, and you know they did. You know, they said they treated the second one as the Predator Bible. So, you know, in August of 89, you began developing Predator 2 with the Thomas brothers before that first draft was even completed. I mean, you just said you got a 60-page thing with Arnie, and you know, you personally contribute story sequences like the opening street shootout, the subway train sequence, and you know, you apparently drew more than 400 storyboards for the film. People like to go on about Ridley Scott and Alien, but you were here cranking them out for Predator 2 as well. So, actually, you know,
I found them recently. There are 1,100 pages of them, and the ones that were in the ultraviolet sequence were in black with color on them. I mean, they're very literal, you know, I don't think I injected many of my own sequences. I think everything in here was from the Thomas brothers. You know, I think I hopefully made them bigger and better, or at least better or something. But there were financial constraints which sometimes pushed us into different areas, so things would change. But I think all the sequences were in the original draft of it. I don't think I was smart enough to add a whole bunch of stuff into it.
Fair enough. Well, what was it like working with those guys, though? I mean, especially from such an early process. I mean, I don't think that tends to be terribly typical of working all the way through that creative process with the writers, is it? You know, you come aboard sort of towards the end, maybe do a rewrite or two. But, you know, what was it like working with those guys?
Well, they knew exactly what they wanted, you know, and they'd been working on it for a while, I think. So they're delightful guys. You've spoken to them, I'm sure, over the years, right? Oh, they're really.
They have no social presence whatsoever, and I can't find any contact details.
I don't think I've seen them since we did. I think years later I came across them once for something, but yeah, they are very quiet in the background, kind of like a couple of cowboys. These guys, and but they're very gently spoken, but they're very clear about what they saw, and they knew what Joel liked, and they knew what worked from the first film. And you know, it wasn't supposed to be, I don't think, quite as hyperbolic as maybe I helped it become. I think it was supposed to be more of a menacing sort of, you know, thriller in a city, and I think, you know, I got carried away with all the new toys I'd never had before, and And of course, we could do things in those days you can't really do often in films now. You can't land helicopters in the middle of LA anymore, or blow up streets. And our first week was that opening shootout, and it was just mayhem. I don't know how he got away with it, really. Yeah. But I've got to say, the Thomas brothers are going to take stuff. Stan Winston, I worked a lot more with Stan than I did with them, I think, coming up with new gags and
we're very involved in the creature design, kind of.
Yeah, they had a million ideas, and we just narrowed them down to the ones that we thought we could do well, and that were fitted into the story, so it just wasn't, stuff happening all over the place. I mean, I got very involved, in the sequence in the slaughterhouse. We came up with the ideas of having the dust in the air and all the different cameras on the shoulders and all that kind of stuff, which was, very complicated to shoot. But it was, and then I wanted the Predator to feel like a larger than life, real creature, that had its own mystery and stuff. So I concentrated on him a lot. And then we just went to town making all the characters. How about those Jamaican guys? Oh my God, they were so bonkers.
And didn't you get those guys just off the street? Like, a lot of them weren't actors. I mean, Calvin Lockhart was, I think, a Shakespearean actor, but someone like Goldtooth and stuff, weren't they like bouncers?
No, they were stunt guys. They're all stunt guys.
Stunt guys. Okay.
Yeah. Because they all had to, there wasn't a lot of chatting going on there, but they had to, have a physical presence, and then they all had to die fantastically horribly. So,
and they did. Did Joel Silver? He tends to have this reputation of being a hands-on producer. I think Predator 2 and Die Hard 2 were sort of parallel. Was he spending most of his time with your production, or was he over on the Die Hard 2 set most of the time?
He was on the Die Hard 2 set because I think it was a very troubled production. I think they went, you heard all the stories, I'm sure. They went for snow and they didn't have snow, and they kept on moving around. And it went, I think, quite heavily over budget, I think. And but when I needed him, he was always there, and he'd come in and abuse somebody and make things happen and fight for things. He was a big fighter. But actually, this is all history, so it's nothing new. During the making of the film, he was thrown off the Fox a lot, actually, and he wasn't allowed to be there anymore. So, and he was finally allowed to come back in for some of the sound mix, but he really went up against, the Fox studio, and they chucked him off the lot for a while.
Can you fill us in on this one? Because I know the Ruben Blades situation where you intervened on that live broadcast and pulled him right off, it was Joan London, I think it was, and got a lot of heat for that. But this Joe Silver thing is new to me. What happened there?
Oh, I think if you look at history books, it's all there. I think he just really, Die Hard 2 turned into a huge production issue for the studio, and they didn't have any luck on the film. They were having they were moving to Denver to get snow, and there was no snow, so they'd moved to Boston, really big, huge budget moves for everything. And I think he just got to a point of fighting with them so much that that they just said, look, it got really heavy. And our film was actually quietly being made in the background while Die Hard 2 was going sort of through the roof. I'm not telling anything that people don't know. I think he just, he ended up at Warner Brothers after that, and he never made another movie for Fox, I don't think.
So it was over Die Hard 2 that he was thrown off. It wasn't anything from Predator 2.
No, we got looked at more after because of it, in case we were doing something outrageous. In fact, our production manager got fired and they put someone new in, and I had to deal with a lot of, suddenly being under the microscope in case we were running amok. But we didn't have the kind of budget that Die Hard 2. It was huge, the Die Hard 2 budget, I think.
So in terms of like your experience, on the set as a director, it was what your second big film, really, I guess.
My first really big film, the Nightmare on Elm Street 5, we shot in a shoe factory for $6 million. So So I think this was my first big Hollywood experience. I mean, The Highlander, I did a lot of work on that. I was on that film for months and months, and I shot huge sequences on that film. But this was my first personal first outing.
In terms of that kind of thing, it being then your first real big studio kind of thing, did you find it an easy experience? Because I see a lot of parallels between you and like David Fincher, and his first big film was notoriously awkward to do.
Was it Aliens?
Aliens 3, yeah. So from your perspective, as it being your first big director gig, how was that experience getting through it? Were you not fighting with the studio? You were just getting on, and even though you were doing your crazy 28-year-old running around the streets kind of thing, it was a smooth process.
I was so excited. I didn't really notice a lot of that stuff. There wasn't a lot of studio politics. They said this is what you got to make it, and we already had the wonderful Alan Silvestri involved, so you knew he was going to do a great job, and there was already an audience for it. They thought, there were some moments where they wouldn't let me do stuff, so I would have fight stuff. I've always fought too much, probably in my career, made enemies here and there, and get too carried away. But it was actually just mainly a pleasurable experience, I think, because Danny was terrific. Gary was just a riot, and on set, and Maria and Bill Paxton obviously was just everyone's favorite because he's such a delightful, great guy. And Ruben Blades, was just a really cool bloke too. That interview thing was an amazing, because we were shooting this. We had 2 nights doing this big sequence, to do with them finding the dead bodies in the stuff, and we had these huge complicated. We had cranes on top of cranes on top of cranes doing these complicated shots, and the sun was going up, and I'm going to Josh McLaglen, the AD, where is Ruben? And he said he's outside, because they're getting interviews all the time, right? And so the sun's coming up. I'm about to lose the whole thing. And I see him there, and he's a great guy. And I had no idea it was live, so I just, pulled apparently cursed for the Good Morning America's last ever live interview, apparently, because of it. And I had no idea, and we shot it, and we got it, and it was great. I went to bed, and I woke up with like 50 messages on my antique answering machine the next evening before going to work, and found out I, caused such a lot of trouble. And I got death threats about it. And after shooting the following night, we went on to Good Morning America the following morning, Ruben and I, and we were thinking of playing some gags and having a fight, during the interview. But in the end, we could hear Joan London in New York, everyone talking. They didn't realize we could hear them talking, and they weren't looking for trouble, so we could hear what they wanted, and we just smiled, and I apologized because obviously I had no idea.
Did the studio give you any heat for that?
No, everyone was on my side. It was a completely innocent mistake, and I had to get the shot, So
this is fair. So, personally speaking, for me in particular, the could have beens of films are one of the things that I absolutely love learning about, and it fascinates me. It fascinates me so much. So, on that vein, one of the things I'd really like to ask you about is the other potential casting choices that could have been made for Predator 2. And one of the more interesting ones for me in particular is this mention of John Lithgow potentially being in the running for Peter Keyes. Do you remember much about meeting with him and what that would have been like?
I worked with him years later. I mean, he would have been great because he's such a giant, towering presence. But I don't remember that at all. I maybe they'd talked to him before I came on or something, but it was all very rushed. It was an accelerated production from beginning to end. When they finally went boof, when we were off, we were off and running, with very little production, very little prep really for a film like that, because a lot of the, Stan Winston had done a lot of the work beforehand, which is a huge thing. And all the robotics guys had tested everything. But no, I mean, John Lithgow would have been great, but there's something about Gary in that film where he's just so full of energy.
He suits the film.
Yeah,
and
he's so specific. He does exactly what you ask him to do, he does it with this unbridled love of acting. He doesn't give a shit. It's great.
Were there any other potential casting choices that stick out in your head for anybody?
No, I think, Maria was a really obvious choice. She was quite a big star at that point. Bill obviously had been in, Aliens 2 by then, right? Has that already been made, right? And so I think he was really well known and perfect for it because he's such a fun guy as well as such a great actor, I think. Now there was once Danny was on, and one of the reasons I was pleased about Danny too, I think sometimes in films, if you get an actor like that, they're a magnet for other good actors. People go, oh, we want to work with Danny Glover, So there was no problem getting on that kind of stuff. And because we placed it in a sort of Latino future, we were really going for Latino actors a lot for the guys around him. I think we really didn't spend, it wasn't like people were coming in and reading the script. We went for people and said, yes, I think I wish I had some fun, exciting anecdotes to tell you, but that's just the way it was.
Well, speaking of Bill, then it's been 4 years since he passed, and we all still really miss him, and he's made such a big impact on the specifically the films we love as well. The ones that we're here to talk about on the website, as well as so many others. And Bill was one of these people that or so the story goes, that you just went, Bill, do you want this role? I love doing Aliens. Do you want to come and be on this thing? So, what was your experience working with him? Are there any particular sort of like days that stand out where he just like knocked your socks off or anything like that?
I think he wanted to do it actually because he liked the character, because his character was a real goofball, but you can't just do comedy relief. If you're going to have someone playing a cop, they can't just be there for jokes. They've got to be good at their jobs. So his character was because Bill's a very tough guy, he's a very athletic, very strong guy. So he's willing to play and have fun, but he also really was committed to his stuff. It's very difficult for you to ask me to remember days on set 30 years ago now, but it's, but he was up for anything, I don't think he and Gary Busey had any scenes together, because that would have been an explosion, I think, if that had happened, because those two energy together in one room, they're both really high energy people. And it would have been a real energy off, I think, between the two of those guys. But Bill, Bill was up for anything. He'd make a fool of himself. You could be convinced that you wouldn't want to get into a fight with Bill. It's like difference between Sean Connery and Roger Moore. Sean Connery can make a joke, but you wouldn't want to get in a fight with him. I know, actually, because he's yelled at me on set. But it's but Roger Moore, you'd probably share a joint with Roger, I think. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to but Bill was like possibly a real, formidable physical presence, as well as having all the other stuff to go along with it, and so I think that's what made his character so popular in the film, I think.
I don't know if you heard this, Stephen, but the fans have developed a theory that Bill's character, Jerry Lambert, has fathered Leona's baby. We know there was a husband. We know there was a husband in that script that was ultimately cut out.
Right.
But that's the going theory now. That they
I don't think she would have had him. I don't think. I think they genuinely, the characters, the actors really liked each other, but the characters really didn't like each other, and that was one of the fun things about that pairing, I think. So, yeah, I don't think that was his baby. But
well, I guess speaking about cutscenes, it's well known that the classification board had originally wanted to give Predator 2 an NC-17 rating.
Yeah.
And to prevent that, you had to make many cuts to bring it down to an R. It always sounded like these were smaller cuts made around gore rather than any significant changes. But we were curious if there was any substantial impacting cuts that you can recall, even impressive gore that you wish fans could have seen.
I'd love to be able to come up with some stuff again, but actually it was really frame by frame cutting. I think we had to go back 17 times with the film. And a part of it was political. I think they were trying to make a statement with Joel's films because he was making all these big violent action films. And I'd already had a run-in with them on Nightmare on Elm Street as well. I think they also had a hard on a little bit for Bob Shaye in the Nightmare films. And it was just this period of time. So because I'd had a run-in with them and Joel constantly, they wanted to make a bit of an example. And at one point it was thought, well, maybe we should just go with the NC-17. Maybe that would be huge, the first time anyone had done it. But, there are all the repercussions of not being able to advertise in newspapers and this is obviously before the internet. And so it was a really a choice that the studio wasn't willing to make. But in the end, actually, it was more to do with political conversations, I think, as well as tiny cuts, and some of the nudity in the Jamaican scene with Terry Weigel and hanging on shots too long. It was really that kind of boring stuff that could cut out. I don't think they didn't cause us to cut any scenes out of the film. It was just sort of trying to whiz by things, and of course this was a time when it wasn't easy to freeze frame things like it is now. Now you can go through every frame and see every disgusting gore bit. And I'm actually shockingly not a big gore fan. I gotta say, I'm kind of queasy, and so I just thought it was all fun. I didn't never really saw it as like, but I at the same time, I think if there's violence in films, I think it should have an impact. I don't think it should ever be, violent porn. I think it should be, that's it should be frightening. That's the point of it, right? And
it's turned into this big urban legend. It has grown that people are suspecting there's just 20 more minutes of Predator 2 gore. And
what should we make up now? There was a huge underwater sequence, which was great, and lots of no. In the end, it was like scenes like King Willie being killed, and his head being stuck, all that kind of stuff. You had to go into every single thing and to make them feel good about themselves. But no, I mean, there was no time. There was we had no time to edit this thing. We were, and because in those days we were still editing on film, I had a desk the size of this room because some of it was in 70 mil, some of it was in 35 mil. So Mark Goldblatt and I, when we were sitting in the edit room, we were going, if we're going to make an edit, we just look at each other and go, okay, come back later, because you'd have to cut all these different, 10 tracks of sound, and you literally have to climb across the Steenbeck to get to that bit and cut that bit. And it was all done on film. And if you changed the visual effect, the repercussions were, the time and money were huge. And we just had to sort of go with our gut.
Well, speaking of that small window, and actually I remember as a young teenager reading those magazines and like, oh my God, Stephen Hopkins, he had no time on Nightmare on Elm Street 5, and now he had no time in Predator 2. Is he going to think that this is like the way Hollywood goes? But I mean, with principal photography beginning February 20th, 1990, and with that final release date being moved up to November 21st, I mean, and that ridiculous small window you had to complete the film, do you look back and marvel at the accomplishment Predator 2 is with such a small period of time to make it?
Yeah, I did a good job of shooting the right shots, but a lot of other people, Mark Goldblatt obviously is a master of his craft, and you look at all the great films he's done. But Joel Hynek, who did all the visual effects stuff, which a lot of it was brand new, and it was all on film, so there were no quick turnarounds on things. So we were editing and doing the visual effects as we went, and that's the only way it could happen. And it kind of suited me then, because when you're 28, you don't need to sleep, right? You're like on it, my hair's flying in the wind, and we're just like, booming along. And Alan Silvestri had done we'd taken a lot of the score from the first film. It was all re-recorded beautifully back up at Skywalker Ranch afterwards with this huge orchestra, which is one of the highlights of my career, I think, working with him on that first one. But everyone knew what they were doing. Stan knew what he was doing. Everything was properly prepared from that point of view. And I didn't really change, actually. I very rarely have done a film where the post was this generous, gorgeous thing. And now it gets worse and worse on electronic post, because now they think, look, electronic, you just do it. It's and there's a different way of thinking in those days. But it was that kind of film. I think it was shot with a velocity. The film has a huge amount of velocity. It doesn't hang around very much. It's a train. It's a fast train, and we all knew it before we started. I always thought the Thanksgiving release was a strange choice, but what do I know? I haven't worked in Hollywood before, so they know what they're doing. I always thought it was a counter programming experiment, and I'm not sure if it worked, but I know it opened really well the first weekend, but I think everyone was so disappointed by the Arnold thing, that probably if we had a couple more months, we could have finessed it better, but it really wouldn't have changed the film, I don't think, that much, the nature of it.
Yeah, I remember that being a big criticism, that Arnold wasn't coming back. It was like a Terminator film without Arnold, or an Alien film without Sigourney Weaver. At that point, it was still considered Arnold's franchise. And I think during the time of Predator 2's release, he was the biggest box office star in the world. And that was between Total Recall and Kindergarten Cop, and then Terminator 2 that followed it. Yeah. So that must have been rough to, you already had the chips against you.
Yeah, I didn't know, I had no idea, but yeah, I didn't realize he was such a huge star till afterwards. But, there's been Terminator films with Arnold in, which have been shit too, and there have been a couple of Alien films that haven't been very well, just didn't work with Sigourney. So
those came later. Yeah.
This was the day when film posters were an actor's giant face, there was the era of that in those days. And that's not the case anymore. It's now if there was a Predator, it might not have the actor's face on it. There would be it's more of a brand thing, but without, if it had been Predator 2 with Arnold in, you wouldn't have had, right? You wouldn't have, he's in town for a few days to kill with him waiting on the thing. It would have been Arnold, and that made all the difference. And yeah, but I think it would have been impossible for him to do it. I think the schedule with the Terminator film, and that film was a film that took a very long time to make, so, and Jim is very meticulous in his prep and everything. So he was just not willing to get caught up in our schedule, I think.
Yeah, well, that was probably him being burnt over the first one, to be honest, because didn't he get pulled back off the original for Conan? Is that right, AJ?
Oh, did he?
Yeah, so James wanted to do Terminator with Arnie, but then he got pulled off to do one of the Conans.
Yeah,
Conan the sequel to Conan.
It was a sequel to Conan. So, but actually, James Cameron found that was a benefit because it gave him more time to prep for his Terminator shoot. So, and
the first Terminator film is a great example of a guerrilla style of shooting on a science fiction film. I always, with Predator 2, I went a bit crazy, but those science fiction films where you feel like they really happen, and they're grounded and stuff, and that world exists, that's always more fascinating to me than the completely Lost in Space is an example of not a grounded film. It's just there's no reality to it at all, whereas this was, as I said, we decided to shoot it like a dusty western in LA, and it was more like a western and a thriller than a science fiction film or a horror movie, I think.
One of the aspects of Predator 2 that fans love so much is just the expansive world building when it came to the Predators themselves. In particular, the City Hunter Predator introduced a wonderful array of otherworldly weapons to audiences. Now, the Thomas brothers previously mentioned that there were twice as many weapons developed for this film, but only half of them made it into the movie. So do you recall at all, Stephen? I know it's been a while, it's been 30 years, but do you recall any of the other weapons in the Predator's arsenal that didn't make it on screen?
Let's see. The ones we introduced were that net that he fires out of his wrist, right?
Yeah.
We had a version of the laser thing in the first one, but we made it bigger and better. Did he have this? Did he have this the spear in the first one? He did. No, because
no.
Had that expanding. We saw where it came from. The flying disc. I'm I should be better prepared, but I remember. Stan's shop had loads of drawings of stuff, and in the end, we just took out the ones we thought that could actually work in the story, and we could afford to spend the time. We didn't want to do 20 things moderately. We wanted to do half a dozen things well. I think I can't really remember anything that didn't get into it. There were the other ideas. I think were mostly half-assed ideas. They weren't. I think there was something that they thought, should he fly or something? Should he have some sort of backpack? Should his mask? But we did stuff with his different visions that he had. We put that kind of stuff in, and that was kind of complicated. No, once again, I'm going to be disappointing and dull and not be able to remember anything. I think he was such an upgrade anyway, and we wanted to make sure that he didn't, if he could pull literally anything out of his arse, we thought then, you want him to feel like he's got all the right stuff on, but, he couldn't shoot a bullet out of his finger or something like that.
Well, you were talking about.
We always kind of saw him as a stripped down warrior, where he would drop into anywhere with what he's wearing. And that was a part of his challenge, right? He'd fight. He'd be like a hunter. He'd go into the woods with what he had on, and he would take on, I'm a big skier, and I skied in Taos one year, and I had this great instructor who would take me off piste, and he had most of his fingers missing, but he was a great archer, and he had his fingers bitten off by a bear, but he would take people into the woods, and he would only take people in if they would, hunt for moose or elk, which are gigantic, but only with bows and arrows, no guns. And once they went in, they would have to strip the animal down, skin it, and carry everything out. And that's what I always kind of saw how the Predator was. That was his challenge to himself, was to be able to travel light. And we didn't want him to sort of like that great first aid kit he has when his hands cut off. That was awesome, I thought. And that was mostly fluorescent gel from a Halloween shop, and all this kind of stuff with a smaller stunt person, so we could make all those things happen. And we made the bathroom a small set, so to make him look huge. And, to have all those tricks where it looked like he was, he was a bit like a commando, and a Marine, and everything was compact to his body, all 8 foot of him. That was a challenge, I think.
But the nature of the Predator and how he was presented in your film is a big reason why there's so many of us that are fans, because it was really that film that we could tell that the Predator wasn't a psychopathic monster. We see these aliens in movies that just want to eat human flesh or just kill for the sake of killing. But we never saw a creature before that actually spared its prey. When Danny Glover sits there and defeats the Predator, he gets rewarded for it. And it was fascinating for so many people, including myself, back in 1990 to see that. So it was just really a unique, it felt like a slasher film, yet it felt like something more. And your film really conveyed that.
Well, I think it comes back to the analogy of the hunter again. I think that's what Jim and John wanted too, to feel like if there was no honor system, then like you just said, he's just a psychopath going around and there's something much more, there's something quite human about it. You can understand it. I'm not a hunter, but I know a lot of environmental people who were great environmental who started off as hunters because they wanted to go in the wild and feel the wild and be challenged by it, and to face off against a creature, not shoot a lion through bars like all these trophy shit, or to go and shoot a deer from 1,000 yards, away with a weapon, but who wants to get to understand nature, I think, and understand themselves. And I think this hunter mentality was what you're talking about. And I think often in the other Predator films I've seen, there wasn't a chance to explore that. He was such a big character in this. And it would have been difficult, I think, after this film to have taken it much further. Unless he had a girlfriend or something. It was. This is the film that showed his code of honor. I think more than the first film had time to, and the films afterwards were mostly the Predator with aliens or other. So it was more sort of battle films rather than about the creature itself. And then, of course, at the end, like you say, we had the Lakers dressed up as the other Predators coming out and creating quite a moment, which was an amazing time on set, I have to say. Yeah.
Well, in that ship with those Lost Predators, the late great Larry Paul, who I think died earlier this year, explained that the Lost Predators ship set was designed to appear organic and biomechanical in nature. And while fans have been able to learn details about much of the ship's design, there's been little mention regarding the ship's antechamber ceiling that appears like a large reptilian eye. Do you recall any thoughts of that curious ceiling design or anything else about the ship that might not be common knowledge?
Well, we started with what the Predator looked like, and there was a sort of, he had a kind of scaly skin and there was a reptilian quality to him. And actually we came up with lots of different ideas, most of which were too expensive. And we came down and down and down into something, once again, because he was, traveling mostly, it was a small craft. He dropped in, he hunted and he left. It wasn't supposed to be like a city landing, it's something that you had to hide in the forest or in the city. And we actually kind of based it. It was more of less than an eye. It was more like a giant snail shell, if you look at it, because all the pieces were kind of overlapping. So it was like organic matter. It was the spaceship was made of something that was living, and it was a real challenge to light. And Peter did a great job. We kind of backlit the fiberglass panels. We had 1980s rock videos, dry ice on the floor. Because we couldn't build all of it, we couldn't afford to, and it felt bigger than it actually was. It wasn't that big a set, but I think it was more trying to make it feel organic and alien. And unlike the great Ridley Scott and James Cameron, where they took science fiction and they made it feel like you're in the bowels of a submarine or in a battleship, where they brought science fiction right down to earth. We thought, just do something different and make something really different looking, but something that didn't, something that felt as organic as the creature as itself. I think, something you never saw, obviously, how he flew the ship or anything like that. It was much more like a cocoon. Like a shell to protect him from the elements that he just moved from one space into another with.
Yeah, we saw no dials or knobs or anything to control the ship. It was fantastic.
Yeah, that's just chickening out, so we don't have to figure it out. But you probably see more of the ship, or more of what it was in the sequence where he's cleaning the head. I think in a way that's what he wanted the ship, which was quite horrific too. I mean, the feeling of that, and then of course Stan and I sort of snuck an alien skull in there too as a joke, partly, and we thought we'd get in trouble, and there was a bit of it left in the final cut, I think.
Before we go off onto that, because we are going to go off onto that, do you think? I mean, a thing in sci-fi now is that creatures utilize other creatures as space travel. Not Alien. Star Trek did it, Lex did it, Farscape did it, that kind of thing. Do you think could have been anything in terms of the Lost Tribe ship being a living entity, perhaps? Was that ever in the mind, rather than a nuts and bolts kind of ship?
No, we just thought it would be made out of biomechanical materials. So it wasn't made out of metal necessarily, and it wasn't made out of, it was almost ceramic. It was almost like, as I said, we went to nature for it, as if it was the shell of a tortoise or the armadillo or some sort of, we kind of tried to, And and then there's a belief that that will be the case in the future. I think that some of these devices will be grown, as opposed to forged. I think, and yeah, and we just wanted to make it feel lightweight and not too enormous and not too, not like a city of creatures, not like E.T. or something. Close Encounters or something. It's not like a city landing. It's a one-man pod.
More intimate.
Yeah.
Okay.
More like armor, I think, in a way.
And now I have to ask this question because the fans have been asking this for years and they continually love to discuss it. You were talking about the heads of Arnold on a poster. We need to know, where is Peter Key's torso? And what we mean is, when the Predator throws his smart disc and deals the death blow to Gary Busey's character, we see the bottom half of his body fall, but his amputated upper torso and his head is nowhere to be found. Now, there is a pillar in that shot that it possibly could have fallen behind, but most consider it a blooper or gaffe. So
it's an MPAA thing. They had us take it out. When you saw the torso with all the entrails flying through the air, that was one of our sacrifices.
So that was actually filmed?
Yeah, it was a real body that they all fell together. And when he went down there later on, we cut around it. There was what was left of it, but it's one of the deals we made. So his body's there. It's the MPA I have it.
So that's on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, if we'd let that shot stay a little bit longer, you'd have seen the legs fall and the torso come down. But we just gone cut around, all 6 frames out of here, 10 frames out of there. Whatever.
It's funny what things become such a hot topic among the fan community.
Right, no, I understand. I do the same with movies too. Yeah.
So you just sort of touched on the alien skull thing, and that is, back then, before AVP entered the theatrical series, that was a huge part of the excitement of Predator 2. It's such a small moment, but it meant so much to a lot of people. But it's one of those things that's become a bit of a curiosity. Because there's been a lot of different stories about it. In an interview with Starburst, I think you meant in 1991, you'd said it was your idea.
Stan and I brought it up to Stan. And he's a very mischievous guy. So, but Fox really wanted us to cut it out. I don't know what it was, because while I was making Predator 2, I was offered Alien 3 by Fox, and so I knew, and I just didn't want to do Nightmare on Elm Street 5, Predator 2, and Alien 3. I just thought, maybe I should have done it. But it was, I knew Fox owned all the rights for these things, but I think there was something going on, because I thought it was really fun, and it's in much more in the original cut we did, but it wasn't MPAA. The Fox really didn't. They thought it was distracting, whereas I didn't see why. I thought it supported the myth. If you're going to go up against the most dangerous creatures in the universe, there's one of them right there. And maybe, I don't know if they thought, oh, the alien would have killed the Predator or this or that, but it's in for a brief moment, right? And I fought to try and keep it in, because I just thought it was literally for that. As a fan, I would have loved to have seen that. I want to see that.
Oh, God, yeah. Well, that's why so many people are excited by that one as well. Had that been something you'd thought about since you basically started Predator 2 then? Because I think, I sent you that storyboard that you'd done with the skull on there. So that must have been in your mind for a little bit of time while you were working on it.
I was in Stan's shop, and Stan's shop was just, oh God, you could just spend days there if you wanted to. He had such great shit all over the shop, and they had these amazing skulls. And I went, oh my God, we've got to get this in. And when I was storyboarding, I put it in because I just thought it wasn't in the script to start with, but it was in Stan's shop, I think, hanging over us in our conference room. So I thought, that's got to go in.
Was that just like one of the props from Aliens just knocking around up there?
Yeah, which he made bigger and better. He took it a bit further, and he's a great loss. He was such a great guy, Stan.
Yeah, no arguments there.
Do you know that alien skull is still missing? It was stolen shortly after production, and you could still find it on the Los Angeles Police Department website. missing art pieces.
And there it is on the wall next to it. No.
I was wondering. Actually, we do love one of the questions we do love to ask people who made the films we love so much is about souvenirs. So is there anything that you kept after production? Do you possibly, Stephen, have a Predator mask or a smart disc sitting around your house somewhere?
No, they were there was no way they were going to let any of us have any of that stuff. I mean, I think I was given some, action figures, which are still in boxes. I've got all the storyboards. I've got a lot of paintings I did personally for the film, including ideas for the I did one of Danny Glover hanging off this kind of gargoyle with a predator standing above it with LA behind. And I often have to paint stuff and draw my stuff myself to imagine it, to place it. But I've never been much of a keeper of things. I think there's stuff in storage, but I just, there's no way they wanted you to have it. And they were expecting to do Predator 3, 4, 5, 10, 11. And I'm not sure they didn't, because the film didn't perform so badly that it was, I think one of the reasons we did the new version of the 70mm print last year of the film is because Shane's film was coming out and they thought that was going to reignite the series again. And because it didn't happen, now they didn't put out a 30th anniversary on, which they wouldn't have been able to do this year anyway now, I guess, because no one's in the cinema. But it's interesting that I guess the Predator never had massive audiences, did it? It was never a worldwide blockbuster. I've got to say my residual checks say something different, because a lot of people have seen that film. It's kept me going for a long time, but it was never the size of the Alien films, was it? I don't think, or films or anything like that. It was always a kind of smaller, weirder hybrid, wasn't it, between horror and science fiction. And I think a lot of people perceive it as a guy in a rubber suit, kind of, a piece. But we tried, I think most of the films have been very good to the Predator. I think when the Predator and the Aliens both went digital, something got lost for me in those films. I'm not sure, because we had a guy there, and at one point we had 8 guys there, all in suits, and they're all standing there, and you got a camera and the actors are there and you can feel it, and it's different when you're told there's someone walking around with a tennis ball on a stick and say, oh, maybe look how scary this is, But when you've got something real to play with, you get great photographic accidents and all sorts of exciting stuff happen. And I think it's a bit of a loss in the film world, as much as I love it sometimes, with having to do this digital stuff, not to have the real things in front of you. And to this day, I did a pilot I thought was great last year for Dark Tower, which was a huge TV pilot, for the new series. And it was really epic in scale, this thing. But we almost never had a green screen. We built everything, and everything was there for real. And the actors really reacted to it. Clearly, Amazon didn't. But I think there was a change of the guard while we were making it. And so what we ended up doing, which is what we intended to do, was not what they wanted. But it was, when you build stuff for real, I think it really helps everyone, and it gives it a sort of, or maybe I'm just being an old-fashioned person, but it gives you a feeling you can touch something, I think.
I think that's something that matters a lot to fans of, of Predator, fans of Alien, fans of sci-fi and horror in general. Practical effects is a huge thing. When you do get a new genre franchise film coming out, the thing they want to know is, are you sticking with are you sticking with practical effects here? Is this going to be a guy in a suit kind of thing? So, it isn't just you. Don't worry. It's not just you. It's whole sleuths of fandom and the audience that like that tradition.
You get the right guy in the suit too. Kevin Peter Hall, just a master. I mean, he was like a brilliant dancer, and he could contort his body. He was incredibly fit and physical. His costume weighed like 120 pounds, and we had to run around with that thing on. His headpiece by itself was like 40, 50 pounds. And he had all these electronics and 5 or 6 people operating remote control stuff on his head while he's acting. He was an extraordinary person. There's no coincidence that the films he was in when he was in costume were so successful, I think.
It was so sad to lose him. I think he died, within 6 months of the film's release. And at the time, everyone knew it was a blood transfusion. And I thought a lot of us thought he might have had a blood disease like hemophiliac or something. But we were able to find an article in the New York Times that it was he got a blood transfusion due to a car accident. And they just weren't testing blood for HIV at that time. And it was just so tragic to lose him so young. I think he was 30s, early 30s.
Yeah, and I think in the shoot, he got really hot and really cold constantly, and we couldn't afford to take the whole thing off all the time. So because of the awful experience with the HIV transfusion, it turned into pneumonia. And that's one of the primary ways that HIV used to get people in those days. And it just killed his immune system. And obviously, none of us knew it happened. It was very last minute when we all found out about it.
Well, he's still among the fans. He is, there's been a lot of people that have donned the Predator suit and have done a good job at it. But Kevin Peter Hall remains the favorite, the trendsetter, the standard bearer. And,
well, there's something again about animating something the way you want to do it, and someone playing it. Because if you animate it to do anything you want, then it defies gravity to a certain extent. However beautifully done it is nowadays, all the time, it's still, if there's a choice, you have it there for real. I think so. It has weight, and it isn't as perfect as it. When it's too perfect, I think unconsciously you don't believe it as an audience member.
That's the uncanny valley thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think he did a lot of studies in dance as well.
Yeah, and he did a lot of studies in African dance for this character, and he brought a lot of that sense into how he moved and how he held the spear and all that kind of stuff.
Did all the finger motion as well, yeah. So you've mentioned a couple of times now that you and Peter Levy had prepared a new 70mm version of Predator 2 for a potential anniversary release. Was that more just a 4K upscale kind of thing?
Yeah. But it was off the 70mm print, so it looked awesome. Yeah, it was gorgeous, and it was with brand new, color timing technology. And I miss film grain in my old age. I think there's something again that makes you kind of, when everything's crystal clear, then sometimes I don't believe. I remember I was at Mark Goldblatt's house a while ago. I remember he got a new projection system, and he put in this 4K version of 2001. It just looked awful. It was so bright, and it just lost all its epic. We had to fuck around with the controls for ages to get it looking right again. Because it was just. They pump a lot of light into a lot of these things, and because they think you want it to be brighter, but all you end up is seeing the matte lines and not believing what you're seeing anymore. I think.
Were you involved with the Predator 2 4K transfer?
Yeah, Peter Fox and did it a bunch of times. I went and saw one version because I was out of the country. I passed through LA. I was living in New York at the time, so I passed through but we obviously worked on the first one so much. He just made it look as good as it can, I think. But it's. You can keep the darkness. You don't have to make everything bright just because it's going to 4K. It's not
right.
the point.
So just to go back a little bit and test your memory again, apologies. The shooting script that we got our dirty mitts on came with two alternate endings. One is the one we get in the film, but there was a second one where the elder, the greyback predator, actually dealt the death blow to City Hunter and beheaded him. Was that actually filmed, or was that dropped during shooting?
It was dropped. It was talked about a lot, but I think, like you were saying earlier, we just all felt we wanted there to be much more interesting to have a code of honor, I think, and to drop a history piece in, which is taken from the first film and from the comic book too, I think, right? And the idea of having the gun with a date, and so it's partially to set up future films, but it was also a nice, literally, coda at the end of the film, I think, where you no one really wins in the end, you know, and it was like more like a nice, great 70s thriller ending. So, you know, Danny doesn't win, Keyes' lot don't win, you know, the Predators don't win, and there's, you know, it's I thought it was a really good ending. I think some people thought it was anticlimactic, but I liked it.
Oh, no. I think the ending's one of those, again, it's one of those parts that just means so much to fandom because of what it implies and what it was, and just the whole set piece, you know, of that ship as well. You know, it was brilliant. It's one of the memorable moments and the standout moments from the entire franchise. So in a Starburst interview that we've mentioned a few times, and you've mentioned a few times throughout this, you know, Predator 2 was a rushed release, a rushed production, and you know, it resulted in 3 different versions of the film being shown across the States as post-production work was being completed at the same time you were putting these things together. We know there was a pirated copy floating around New York in VHS with you know, no music or FX shots. These different versions that came out in the States, was it pretty much just the quality of the FX work that was being done on them? Was that the only real difference to these?
It was the quality, and I think there may have been some not perfectly MPAA cut versions too, I think.
So maybe some gorier versions out there
with a frame here and a frame there, but it's mostly about visual effects being finished or not being finished, I think.
Okay.
And yeah, and I got sold a VHS in a market in New York where they had all the Predator sequences. After we finished shooting the film, while we were editing, we had to shoot for another 4 weeks of the Predator in red costume, a red Predator, a green Predator, and blue Predator on wires against different color screens, red and on wires doing all the different things. But, you know, so you could create the, you know, on motion control cameras, which were pretty difficult to work in those days. Yeah, so the camera would be doing the same thing and do the same thing every time, and so you could create the prism invisible effect. You know, you needed the different colors, and so all the scenes were with the Predator in different colored screens, in red, green, or blue ones would suddenly pop up in the. So obviously it was a version, because we'd have to send it off to Tennessee all the time to get back, so we could talk to Greenbergs in New York about. So someone in New York snuck a version and. I mean, I had the same thing happen when I was with the movie Blown Away. I finished the film. I went to England for a couple of weeks while they assembled it, and in Camden Market there was a version of Blown Away on VHS before I'd even started editing it yet. So hacking is not a new thing, but it was done pretty brazenly in those days.
It's always amazing to watch the behind the scenes, and I guess is that called a clapboard? But I was looking at the special effects, and they have the dates on that, you know, that little clapboard, and I'm seeing September and October 1990, and I'm like, oh my god, you know, how did Steven get this thing out in time if they're doing these, you know, red suit shots, you know, with a month or two to go, you know?
Well, I remember on the Nightmare on Elm Street film, which I overlapped, I'd finished the sound mix and I was still shooting. And I was doing the sound mix in Warner's Hollywood, which is now called The Lot, and we were outside shooting model shots and all this kind of stuff that we knew what the length of them were, and we'd already put the music and the sound in, so we had to drop them in afterwards. Literally a week before it came out, you know, in several thousand cinemas. And Predator 2 wasn't that bad, but yeah, we were shooting while we were editing at the end.
Well, many years later, after the release of Predator 2, fans were treated with this wonderful video that came out of nowhere that was featuring all the lost Predators on the spaceship set doing a choreographed dance with Danny Glover joining in the end. And I was just wondering if you recall that wonderful sequence and the story behind it, and why like this was never released on, you know, by the studio as a home video supplemental.
Well, Danny had actually persuaded, because he was a huge Lakers fan, when we were shooting, if we had 2 or 3 cameras, we'd be split the screen, and the bottom right-hand corner would be the Lakers game going on, because he had to watch them all. And I knew Magic Johnson a bit because his business management company was my business manager. So So he invited them all to come and do it. Not magic, but the rest of them. And then I went to lunch one day on the Fox lot because the set was out. And when I came back, I was presented with this VHS, which I still have, of them getting down with the ghetto blaster in the dry ice. They'd persuaded the visual effects guys to stay at lunchtime and do the dry ice and do this extraordinary thing. Because these guys are huge. It was a pity in a way that they didn't have something like someone normal sized in there or something normal sized, because when you watch it, if you realize how enormous these guys were, all in their suits, they were between 7'9" and 8'3" tall. When you watch them doing that stuff and you imagine them if they'd fallen over in these huge suits, yeah, that was just a piece of genius. It's on the internet, actually, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, we were just wondering why I never made it on a DVD release. And I always wondered if like Stan found out about it, he'd be out of his mind. Like, what are you doing? We still have scenes to shoot.
It was done right at the end. I think it was the last thing we shot was a spaceship, I think. So right at the very end. Yeah. But I'm sure there were all sorts of legal rights and reasons why it could never be shown anywhere. And you'd have to get all the guys to sign off. And I think the music too, didn't own the music or, all that stuff. But yeah.
So,
that's a one-off.
When you think back to your time on Predator 2, then knowing that it's this rushed, train's left the station, you've not finished till it's out kind of thing. Are there any particular scenes that stand out to you that were the most interesting, the most fun to physically shoot on the day, on the week kind of thing?
I think adrenaline-wise, the opening sequence was crazy because we had. There were so many moving parts, and we had a very young crew. We had guys hanging out of cars with steady cams, and it was really not tightly scripted. So we sort of choreographed a big event that sort of almost really happened, obviously. But it wasn't sort of like, do this shot, this shot, this shot. We sort of created a whole circus and shot it from a lot of different angles. And obviously it was all storyboarded, but it was just a non-stop moving piece, right from when the camera comes up off Griffith Park and to the Predator looking down, and then you're down amongst it, and then you go up into the building and you come out right on the top. So it's just this great snaking piece of filmmaking, which was just really fun to do and lots of different stuff. One of the most complicated sequences I've ever done was the Slaughterhouse sequence and the ultraviolet thing, because the lighting was very difficult. The dust, we all had to wear masks and keep the dust in the air. The Predator choreography on wires, having to fight all these people, having to shoot all these different points of view, and then weeks later running them off VHSs in a set with Gary Busey, with people pressing the VHS machines, lining them all up. And it was mind-bending. It was kind of stuff I loved doing when I was a kid, because it would just be like, how on earth do you do it? There's so many points of view. Including the Predator's point of view, you've got all the different, the soldiers, Marines' point of view. You've got Danny's point of view in the visual effect, in the video place. I mean, there's maybe 20 different points of view all happening at once, and it was just cataclysmically difficult to do. I think we shot it in Culver City in an old warehouse, and the pressure was on. We never had much time to shoot stuff, so we just sort of threw ourselves into it. And in those days, there were no rules. Really, you could just shoot around the clock, which we often did. And but when you say the rush, I'd come from doing rock videos. I mean, this stuff was part of this was no. I had more time than normal. Editing for a few months, that's great. It's like, so it was actually, it didn't feel particularly rushed or crazy to me, because I was on an adrenaline high and used to it in a way.
Would the Slaughterhouse sequence, with how complicated it was, would that have been the most satisfying for you to actually see come together then in the edit?
The fact that it worked was amazing, because that's the one I storyboarded. I have so many storyboards of that to try and remember for all of us, because the lighting is so difficult in that situation. You can't just shoot it in order. You've really got to work out what works in that lighting situation, and you had to rehearse it like crazy to know exactly where everyone's going to be, and it was a filmmaking trick. The subway sequence was interesting too. I thought, the lack of light in that was great, because we weren't allowed to shoot in real subway trains. We shot them up in Oakland, but we built a small set in LA, And I really used the lack of light to help that come alive, to the strobing effect. So you just saw things suddenly, and then there were big sections of black. Yeah,
that shot looks so complicated. Just watching it, I marvel how you guys completed that. When he wants some candy, or the time when I think Bill Paxton's character is shooting at the Predator, and you see the gunshots as Leona looks back in the subway, but the gunshots is not hitting Leona because there's that Predator, that camouflage Predator in the middle. And I'm like, wow, how did they do this with the flickering lights back in 89, 90? It's marvelous.
Yeah, we could never have done it if it was all lit. I mean, I made sure that there was a reason why the lights had to go off, in order to make it work. Yeah.
But you were talking about that slaughterhouse sequence real quick. A lot of people have compared with the cameras and the screens. Thought that might be a nod to Aliens, wasn't it? It was
not so much of a nod as a straightforward copy, I think.
Okay.
I thought the alien sequence was brilliant. It was in the script, so I didn't go. But it was, without the alien sequence, I don't know if I would have been able to accomplish it so well as we had, I think. But
I think it's become a bit of a technical technique that the way when films want to do something like that, that's sort of what they lean on. You had that with most prominently recently probably be Jurassic World. The first one of the reboots they did a similar sequence in that. It's just the technique, isn't it now?
Yeah. And I think we're also used to watching, reality TV and all those, where they use it as well. It's not just in films; it's used in everything now, isn't it? Yeah.
So in the past, you've spoke about how when you revisit Predator 2, you tend to see things that jump out of you that you would have done differently. I was curious as to if there's any particular scenes or any particular aspects that are really noticeable to you and they do jump out about being done different, and how you would have done them differently.
I always think that about everything I do. I'm my worst, most vicious critic of all of these things. But I think I just would have made it probably a little less over the top, I think. So it's a little uneven in tone, I think. Sometimes it feels really real, and then you have these crazy Jamaican guys in gold disco pants, and I just always want a sense of authenticity about stuff, and there's some of it just doesn't feel authentic at all, and some of it really does get to you, and I think there's a strange veer in tones, but there's nothing I'm ashamed of or anything, and I think it is just a child from the MTV running around blowing shit up at will and enjoying it, with huge amounts of backup, working with people who are much smarter than me and could really help me do something that I'd never had a chance to do before. I think maybe the closest I've ever done to anything like that before was on the Highlander. I would shoot a lot of the big battle sequences. I shot the death of Sean Connery in it with that castle falls down around him. I had to shoot some of those things because the first unit just simply didn't have time, and so I'd end up doing these very operatic pieces, and I think there was a bit of opera around about Predator 2, but I think one of the reasons if it turned out well at all is because I didn't have time to think. You just did. Nowadays we kind of sometimes on some movies I poured over them and maybe made them worse by thinking too much. This was more a gut instinct, film, and there's not a huge amount of dialogue in the film. If you heard all the dialogue, it's basically Danny just running really fast and going, fuck, shit, fuck, motherfucker, fuck. In fact, there was an airplane version, even to this day. The airplane version came out, and I got this thing from the MPA about the airplane version, and there was just 3 pages of 4 columns of swear words that had to be cut out, which I'm not sure how rated your show is, but it's every fuck, motherfucker, fuck, like I just had to cut like that.
That's brilliant.
And it made me laugh because it was just.
That was the 80s and 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
I think the airplane cuts of things are brilliant. I love to see the differences. There's one that always sticks out to me is J.J. Abrams' Star Trek, the first one, and it's just one random word. They replaced bastard with buzzard, and it just stuck out to me, and I always think about that one. I love aeroplane edits; they're brilliant.
I was on a plane flying to Tokyo because the Lost in Space was opening there, so I was flying there and on the plane they had Die Hard 2 in it. So while we're flying, this plane's crashing, this jumbo jet.
Oh, no.
People crying in there. There are people crying next to me. Japanese people are like weeping. I guess it's so horrific, you know.
There are rules about that. Oh,
I don't think it'll happen now.
Some critics were initially very hard on Predator 2 during its theatrical release in 1990. But now, 30 years later, it's been fascinating to watch so many critics in today's media embracing the film. Even as recent as last month, Yahoo Movies posed the question, is Predator 2 a misunderstood masterpiece? I think it is. So 3 decades later, what is your perspective on the film now, and how do you feel about all the fans that have come to embrace it?
It's funny, wherever I go in the world, there are cults around this movie, you know, and it's I was working with Monica Bellucci on a film years later with Gene Hackman and Morgan Freeman, and Vincent Cassel was her boyfriend, and he came out and he started talking to me. I don't know what he was talking, and he was quoting the movie to me because in France they have these Predator 2 nights, you know, and then and everywhere I've been, I lived in Brazil for a little while. It was like they would have Predator 2 showing in parks outside because I think it's so outrageous, the film, that people just wait for these big crazy moments to happen, and it's a bit like a circus, the film, I think, in a way, with a few great lines, with massive performances from big character actors. I didn't read the critic stuff. I didn't think it was for critics really when it first came out, and I'm glad people think there's a misunderstood, but it definitely rings a bell with people. I think it was strangely original in a way because it was, as I said, it was more of a sort of tough Western in a city in a Latino future where cars, petrol was running out and water was running out, and it's not completely untrue. You know, there were gangs in LA when we were shooting. We were protected by the Crips, you know, and there were people stabbed while we were shooting. We found dead bodies. We were fired at. People were firing guns at us while we were shooting, real guns. And, you know, it was downtown LA was no joke in those days. So it all added up into sort of, it felt sort of an adrenaline thing, but clever scenes, I think, like the Predator being hurt and fixing itself in the bathroom made it feel more like a thriller or a battle film. Do you know what I mean? And so it was a real mixture of genres, I think. And there was some funny lines in it, and people like Bill are so charming, you know. And
it's so quotable.
Yeah, it's very quotable because there's not much dialogue, but there's probably a dozen great lines in there which people can't wait to yell when it comes up. But it makes you laugh, the film, too. And I think it's a little scary sometimes, too, and surprising. It has twists and turns. Even though it's very similar plot-wise to the original, it's seen from a different point of view, I think.
The Thomas brothers often talked about how they were always spinning ideas for new Predator films, but, you know, it would take another 10 years before Predator actually got to return to the big screen. So we were 10 years? 20? It was 2010, was 20 years. So we were curious as to whether you'd been involved back then, you know, in any potential sequel development for a Predator 3, or was it a Predator 2 and then you were done kind of thing?
I was done, and I think possibly because Fox and Joel had a falling out, I think, and because Die Hard 2, you know, because of Die Hard 2 and Predator 2 not becoming a worldwide smash hit and Arnold not being in it, and because Joel fell out with the Fox at the time, I think no one expected there to be another one in a hurry, you know. But is it really 20 years, was it, before the next one? Wow.
It was 2010, so is my maths failing me there? No, yeah, that's 20 years, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. We had those Alien versus Predator movies.
Yeah, well, I'm not counting those. Okay. I'm counting Predator. That's fair enough. So the last thing, and I'm sure this will probably be a very short one. You've mentioned in this one, and you've mentioned in the past that you were offered Alien 3. So, do you remember much about the state of the film at that time? Was that after Vincent Ward had left, or was that?
I think he just left. I was still shooting, so whenever that was, and there was just a 50-page outline by Walter Hill, I think, and it actually sounded fascinating, but I was kind of exhausted. I worked flat out for a few years in a row, and I thought maybe I should try and do something different next, rather than just another sequel to a big franchise movie. I wanted to do something that had other ideas, which I kind of sort of wish I'd done it now in a fun sort of way, because I didn't hate the film, the Alien 3 at all. I thought it was quite sophisticated. I thought
that very much has its own fans as well. Have you ever thought about how you would have handled an Alien film? Do you have a vision in your head of how you would have tackled that?
Well, the Alien films, because of Ridley Scott and James Cameron, have a much more sophisticated veneer, don't they? They're very. I mean, Alien changed the nature of science fiction completely. I think how he brought that to life with improvised dialogue and brilliant stage actors, and it just felt like it wasn't, and it was very slow and very quiet, and it was a really different type of genre, and it was amazing. I remember watching that film in Leicester Square in 70mm as a kid, and just like hiding under the seats. It was so terrifying, that film, man. And Aliens 2 was similar to Predator. It was just it was a war, right? A little bit. You knew what the alien looked like, so you couldn't keep that. But Cameron did his usual brilliant thematic thing with it, where a mother and a daughter and all that great stuff, which wasn't in the first, obviously nothing to do with the first one. So he made it really different and made it much more fun, I think. And I think that Predator 2 was sort of a bit like that. It was a bit more fun. But no, I mean, I think there's something much more literary about the Alien films, as strange as that sounds. I mean, the last couple have been a bit baffling, but and I remember I actually sat with Ridley Scott, and he explained before he did sorry, what was the one before last, the Alien film?
Prometheus.
Yeah, he explained the story to me before he shot it, and I took an hour just to explain, and at the end I went, wow, I mean, are they going to let you make that? And he looked at me, I went, of course they're going to let you make that. You can make what you like. And he did it. And he has ideas behind it, which I don't think come out in the film, but they're so complicated, his ideas. They're so complex. They're to do with Michelangelo being an alien and all this crazy stuff, and it was, there's something about the Alien films that really, and the creature is brilliant too, isn't it? It's so just creepy. Oh God, it's creepy. And it's much darker, I think, isn't it? It's darker and weirder, and more to do with fear itself and the people than the actual. I don't think the aliens have ever really had characters, have they? They're not a real strong character. I mean, they tried in the last one, I think. And
I mean, so you've got Ripley and you've got Sigourney through the original series.
The lead, not the actual alien itself,
Oh yeah. That's its whole other hierarchy kind of thing with the Queen and Cameron's thing. Yeah.
Well, Stephen, you've been terrific, and that is actually everything from us. But before we let you escape, is there anything you'd like to share? Any anecdote or thought, something you didn't have an opportunity to say with any of the questions we've asked so far?
No. I mean, you guys have been so great. You've asked me some interesting questions. I mean, it's not a a profound thematic film, but it was really fun to try and do something looking a little bit into the future, and to take a genre and play with it and move it into a different direction where it wasn't what it was supposed to be. I mean, often Europeans, we kind of like to mix up genres a lot. If you have Doctor Who, it can be funny and sad and scary and this and that, and often with American films, I found over the years, they prefer to go one way or the other, and to choose a thing. But in Predator 2, it was a real mixture of genres, and I think it was allowed to go that way, and I was very happy to do it. And I'm glad there's some sort of cult thing to it, but it is a lesson to all of us, I think, is not to think too much about something once you start. I mean, think about it beforehand and then just let your instinct and your unconscious run with the ball. As long as you're surrounded by people you trust with good stuff, then I think back at some of my movies, I found them torturous, and this was not one. This was really fun to do. I have great memories of it, I think.
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed recording it. If you were as surprised as I was that AJ kept his shit together and didn't lose it, make sure you let us know, because that seems to be the prevailing thing that people are looking forward to, is AJ just going mad. But sorry to disappoint. He kept his composure and he was a good boy.
I tried to be professional.
I know you used to work on Arnold fans, so did you do many interviews through that? Did you?
We did do some interviews, but they were lower, B-level actors and some of the prop makers and stuff like that. Like we talked to Jody Sampson, who created the sword for Conan the Barbarian, and we talked to the other Sarah Connor, who got shot by the Terminator, the one that wasn't Linda Hamilton. So I never had an interview when I was on board this huge, and this was a terrific interview. This was something that blew my mind and even impressed my wife, and being such a Predator 2 fan myself, the reason why I became a fan, my gateway to this fandom was Predator 2, and this film brought Predator fans and movie files a lot of joy in this past 30 years. So I know Aaron's going to touch on this, but from the bottom of my heart, and Aaron's and all of our community of listeners, just thank you, Stephen Hopkins, for graciously taking the time out of your important day to talk to us, to discuss this film that has brought so much joy to so many. And I want to encourage, if you like Predator 2, I encourage you to check out his filmography. Support his work. He really made some wonderful entertainment. The Ghost in the Darkness being one of my favorites. So check it out. And you might become a fan of not just Predator 2, but some of his other great films and television.
Indeed. And again, thank you for Stephen for doing this. And if you've enjoyed the episode, please be sure to let us know down below in the comment section on either YouTube or the topic, or the news post on the website, or the forums, or even on the socials, wherever you're seeing this. Let us know how you're feeling down below. Let us know if you think we are off to a good start for 2021. Next up, we have an interview with Jeremy Barlow, the writer of Alien vs. Predator Thicker Than Blood, which is one of my top 3 AVP stories. I've got to be honest, me and Adam really liked that story, and Jeremy was really fun to chat to as well. So keep an eye out in the next couple of weeks for that episode. And then following that, we'll be doing our roundtable discussion on the same series. With AJ will be joining us on, and he's a bit more dour on that one. But not sure about if Eric's going to be joining us on that one. We'll see. There's plenty of other stuff coming up after that. We've got Hunters to talk about, Hunters 3, Alien, the original screenplay. I've got a bunch of interviews that I'm chasing, other Alien and Predator people, which should be fun. And as always, if you want to find out more about us as a community, if you've come to this interview, this video podcast, without knowing much about us and you've come for Stephen, you can find us on avpgalaxy.net, which is where the hub of our activity is. We have an old school message board, still alive and kicking, and still my preferred place to be discussing these things. So have a look, sign up, register an account, and join in with the rest of us nerds. If you prefer Facebook, we do have a Facebook group and page. That's Alien versus Predator Galaxy, versus as in VS dot. And we're on Twitter as @AVP Galaxy, Instagram as Alien versus Predator Galaxy, all one word. And of course, if you're listening to this, not watching, then we're also got a YouTube channel with video versions of our podcasts, video editorials, which are video versions of some of the articles that we post on the website, and gameplay, actually. We do Let's Plays, we do live streams of the various Alien and Predator games, so head on over and check that one out as well. Oh, we also do a new sort of video thing on the news called Motion Trackers, which is kind of like mini podcast where we discuss the new big news sort of things. So Marvel's announcements and cover reveals and the Predator 5 / Skulls announcement, the TV, all sorts of that. It's just mini sort of 15, 20 minute, 30 minute mini podcasts on the latest news that's going on around Alien and Predator. If you want to find out more about me personally, you can find me on Twitter at _Corporal Hicks, and that's Aliens, Predator, Star Trek, Stargate, Airsoft. It's more about me outside of Alien and Predator and all the other nerdy stuff I'm into. What about you, AJ? I think you have a little presence.
And you can find me on Twitter at effin, like effin Voodoo Magic.
And it never gets old. And that is Twitter, yes?
Twitter, yes.
Yes, brilliant.
And you can find me in the community forums as well.
Indeed. Well, thank you everybody for watching. This has been Corporal Hicks.
And this has been Voodoo Magic.
Get into the chopper.